Good afternoon. I'm here. My name is Doug Holder. I'm here with my my guest, Philip Burnham, who has a new book out from Somerville's Ibbetson Street Press. It's called Shorelines and Poems from the Water's Edge. And Philip is also an accomplished writer. He's had a number of collections out. I'll read from the biography here. He received the Arizona Quarterly Prize for Best Poem and the New England Poetry Club's Gretchen Warren Award in 2010 and 12. His work was featured on Garrison Keller's National Public Radio. Writer's Almanac. It was a baseball poem, right?
That's correct, yes.
He is the author of 4 books of poetry, including My Neighbor Adam, Sailing from Boston, which was another Ibbetson Street book, Housekeeping, another interesting book, and A Careful Scattering, a Cervena Barva Press, which is another great press, run by Garlier Mindock, a good friend of ours, in Somerville, Mass. He's a resident of Cambridge, but we won't hold that against him. And he was born in Rochester and grew up in New England. One of those Mayflower types, right?
That's correct.
Right.
Almost.
So Philip, you've been a long-time member of the literary group, the Bagel Boars that meets in Somerville. And I was going to ask you, how important do you think and I'm just talking about the Bagel Boars, but I'm just talking in general, how important is a literary community to have for a writer?
I think it's very important. I think Bagel Boards, just as an example, is a wonderful place for people to come to get ideas, maybe even to decompress a little bit from the intensity that they may put into the kind of work that they do. And to meet with other people who are doing parallel things and who are often giving readings that we find out about that we can go to, or working on a book that is just coming out. It certainly seems that almost every time we go, there's somebody with a new book or somebody with a scheduled reading somewhere that allows you to really to share the kind of poetry that everyone in the group is interested in.
And sort of stirs you on. I know I have a bit of a competitive spirit, so if I hear someone's getting a reading or something like that, I wish them well. But also, it gets me my life.
I think that's true. I think you want to do it yourself as well. But I really do enjoy going listening to other people. I was just was at a reading last week that Tino Villanueva gave, and it was a wonderful reading of his new book, and his new book is a wonderful book, by the way. And
Penelope.
So spoke Penelope.
And he sort of took the Penelope character, the long suffering.
He did. He took the woman's perspective over 20 years and her moods and her ups and her downs with Odysseus' absence and dealing with
I just say to hell with him. And
that's right. That's right. Get a divorce.
Get a divorce.
Go on. But not only did he sort of take a wonderful theme, but he also spoke about it in a kind of Homeric tones with references to things that were connected with Homer. And it's really a wonderful book. And that's a kind of experience. And he's somebody who's at Bagel Bards and
was on this show.
And was on the show. Good. Okay. Well, and it's wonderful to be able to sit and talk with people, sometimes about poetry, sometimes about something totally different.
Right. I mean, we could talk about your car or something.
We could.
And we do. We talk about all kinds of things.
We do.
Now, you have a PhD in medieval history. And how did you come by your love of poetry? Were you always into poetry?
I was always into poetry, actually. I started writing. I think 2 things began my love of poetry. One was my mother reading poems to me when I was a little kid. And the other was that I belonged to the Episcopal Church, and its hymns were always rhymed and metered poems, basically set to music. And I grew up sort of with those in my head. And my father was an English teacher, and he knew some poets, actually. He knew Robert Frost, among other people. And so I read these people that he knew, and their poems.
Did you ever meet Frost?
I did, actually. I did know Frost.
You did know him?
I did know him. He was my father's acquaintance more than mine, but he knew who I was. And once I was in Washington, and he was reading at the Library of Congress, and we went up and talked to him afterwards. And he looked at me. I was working for the State Department in those days, and he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, don't you think working for the State Department is betraying your country? This was right after McCarthy.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that was why it was.
What other impressions did you have of Frost?
But he was a man who liked to talk a lot. He liked to be the center of attention. But he was. But I saw him in his sort of native habitat in Vermont, and when he at the end of his life, and there's very rural life, and sort of his connection to the land was really a very interesting thing, even though he was a very urban guy in many ways.
But he was very profound.
He was. I think
he was profoundly connected.
Profound. Yes, he was. That's true. Yeah, he was, and he really saw the landscape and the life of people in the countryside. I think as really something very dignified and very and very tragic.
And tragic.
Tragic, yeah.
Well, I mean, just tragedy in all.
That's right. That's right.
More so in the countryside.
Well, for him, I think, because the relative isolation of people and the kinds of things that they got, the death of a hired man, the things they got into and got involved in. I think that were lonely. It was a lonely life in many ways, and I think, and his was a lonely life in many ways, even though there he was going to be a public figure. So he was influenced, and then when
he had to go to England to get his first book published.
He had to go to England to get his first book published, and he had a lot of help from other people in England, so that was an important part of his life. I had to go to you to get my first book published. So
my neighbor Adam was.
No, that's true. That was, but that was of old things that I had written a long time before, and I was just coming back to poetry after my wife died, and I was in that class with you.
I was going to bring that up. I was going to bring that up in our next question. Actually, I did meet you in a poetry workshop I was giving at Community Education. And
that's right.
You recently lost your wife. Your book, Housekeeping, deals with that loss and your sort of renewal.
Yeah.
So tell me, was poetry therapeutic for you?
It was extremely therapeutic for me.
Right.
It began with the first book that you took, even before Housekeeping, which was Sailing from Boston. And I sat down for the year after Louise died, and I wrote about 3 or 4 poems a month for a year that were a kind of exploration of grief and of remembrance of who she had been and what it had meant to me. And I think there were 2 things that happened. One was, yes, it was a way of working through grief, and the other thing was it was a way of putting on paper what I remembered about her. And that those 2 things, and it gave me a start in writing poetry all the time, every day, because I was retired at the time, and I just started writing poetry every morning.
So you just needed a place to go.
I needed a place to go.
Yes. And just to rejuvenate.
And when she was ill, I even began to formulate the kind of things I was going to say about her.
And I noticed that when I taught that adult education class, that a lot of people come back to poetry after long careers. A lot of those people in that class, and they were just, it's sort of like a rebirth for them sometimes.
It is, I think. I think a lot of people, I would say I didn't dare to be a poet when I was young because I had a family and I couldn't imagine how poetry was going to support a family. I could be a teacher, and I could be, a student of medieval history and take it into classrooms and teach it. But I couldn't imagine, even though I had written some poetry and been not unsuccessful with getting some of that poetry accepted, I couldn't imagine how I would actually, turn that into a life's work. So it wasn't really until I retired that I said, oh, and I'd also lost my wife, and there was an open space in my life in many ways, and poetry filled it.
The noted critic, Dennis Daly, said, and I say he's noted because he's made quite a reputation for himself in these really brilliant reviews.
Yes.
I mean, he could be in the New Yorker.
I think his reviews are wonderful.
Yeah, and he said of your new book, Shorelines, it describes your poetry as emitting an impressionistic, almost Monet-like shimmer of light. Would you describe your poetry? Would you use Monet as a description of your poetry? And do you feel your poetry is impressionistic?
I think in some ways it is.
I mean, I was going to ask you, does does it go below the sparkling surface?
I hope it does.
Yeah.
I hope it does. I mean, the thing is that even you know, if you want to talk about impressionistic painting, yes, there's that sort of superficial application of the paint to the canvas. But then there's also the sense that we come back to it again and again and again because it somehow reaffirms us in other ways, that we really like the way those people have represented the scenes that they have painted. So if it's a winter scene or a summer scene, or if it's people in, you know, in a ballroom in Paris or a restaurant or whatever they are, those scenes reinforce our sense of daily life and the experiences we have. And I think that's really important in poetry, to have it be. I want it to be song, but I also want it to be something that people can sort of see as a part of their daily life.
Okay. Okay. Now, you read. You had what was the name? The answer is baseball. That was the
no. It's called assignment number 1. Write a poem about baseball.
And that was in Weekly Reader also. You were on Garrison Keillor.
It was on Keillor and in Weekly Reader. Yes,
now,
it was.
Now, why do you think baseball is such fodder for writers? I mean, do you think it is even more evocative than, let's say, football or hockey?
It's always attracted people who were, I suppose you would say, intellectuals. Whether or not other sports do. It's strange, you know, think about John Updike's fascination with baseball, and other people too. I mean, he's not the only the guy who used to write for the New Yorker, Roger Angel, who was
and even our friend in the Bagel Bards, Luke Salisbury.
That's Luke Salisbury is another. Yeah. I don't know what it is about baseball. I think maybe it's the fact that there's so many possibilities to what can happen at any moment.
But isn't that true of football? Or
well, it is, but you can't. But the action in front of you goes on so quickly, and with so many people doing so many things at once, that you really can't follow everyone who's doing what they're doing. In baseball, there are a lot of people involved, but at one moment, only 1 or 2 or 3 people are involved in any particular action in baseball. So you can sort of follow it sequentially. You can sort of follow. It has a kind of grace to it that in some, or it may be imagined on the part of the people who are reservers, but even some of the people who are baseball people themselves know that it has a kind of grace as well as an athleticism that makes it an interesting sport in so many ways. And I think a lot of people have grown up associating their lives with baseball moments.
And there's a lot of games. I mean, football is just like 16 games.
Yeah, right.
And I remember, being in high school in the 1969 Mets.
Right.
And just being totally absorbed, and it had all the statistics, and it was every day, and it was just, I couldn't get enough of it.
I think that's right.
And then I lost interest.
Well, that's all right. That's okay. All right. But I think that's true. That people just simply,
But I did write a poem about baseball.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about your poem.
Yeah.
But and I said when Agee remember when Agee hit the home run? And,
right.
And I said when he went around and took that home run strut, and I said, "Will life ever be this clear cut?" Because isn't that about baseball?
Right.
You go to first, go to second. The rules.
You do. That's right. That's right.
And life is chaotic.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And this is an ordered game, which has disorder, and also it's a game of failure. Strangely enough, and I think that's poetic. That 7 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, you don't hit the ball.
Right. But if you hit it 3 times out of 10, you're doing pretty well.
And if you hit it 3 times out of 10, you're doing really well.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's silly. I mean, and anything else that you would say, that's failure. But not in baseball. Mm-hmm. It's very strange that way. So you fail, but you always imagine that somebody's going to succeed. They go up to the plate, they've got the bat, there's a guy on base, they're behind, he's going to do something. Probably he's not. But you don't say that. You never say that about the game. It's funny that you should mention that, because a friend of mine said, you need to write a whole series of poems about baseball. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thought. I might do that. you know, it's a fun subject to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's right.
That would be an interesting project.
Yes,
yeah.
it would.
It's
Yes,
fun,
would.
but it also has a lot of meaning. I mean, baseball is
Yeah.
a metaphor for life.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It is. It is. It is.
So, do you have any readings coming out? I know you're going. You mentioned that you have this Loft Prize.
I'm a finalist for the Loft Poetry Prize in Providence, Rhode Island, which is you had to submit a poem based on a painting in a New England museum. And
what did you choose?
The paintings were from a website. No, I didn't choose Monet, but I chose an impressionistic painting. Isn't that?
Okay.
So they're very good, very good. The impressionist painting is actually a pastel. It's in the Gardner Museum, and it's called New York Blizzard, and it's by Childe Hassam, who
Spell that.
Hassam.
And first name?
He was Childe. Childe. I guess I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced, but he did this pastel in which he has a kind of New York City landscape. I assume it's New York City. He just says New York, but I assume it's a New York City landscape. And the place is completely covered in snow, so that the buildings are just vague outlines of buildings, and there's no longer a sidewalk and a road because the snow has just kind of taken it all over. And on the sidewalk, or what's left of the sidewalk, are these two dark blobs of figures whom you can't really see because you're looking at them from the back, and they're wearing capes, they're carrying umbrellas, they might have boots on. It's really impossible to know exactly because they're very sketchily defined as figures. And so it's a poem about first of all about how the snow sort of obliterates the sharp angles of the city and all the talk that there was about the fact that it had been a mild winter before this. And then it talks about the figures that you can see from the back, and how I think the artist wanted us to see our darker selves contained in blizzardry.
Okay, contained in blizzardry.
In blizzardry, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this front cover of your collection.
Yeah.
Is sort of impressionistic.
It is. That's a friend of mine who's an artist in Paris named Philippe Duchesne, and and that's a painting of his that I actually bought. But it also reminds me of a beach I go to in New Hampshire because I really do.
What beach?
It's called Little Boar's Head, and it's in between Hampton and Rye, and it's just a very small beach. But I've been going there since I was.
What do you have, a cottage up there?
No. It's just it's a public beach. It's a public beach. It's a day trip.
Yeah.
But I started going there when I was 8 years old. My parents took me up there. And speaking of poets, one of the other poets who used to vacation there in the summer was Ogden Nash.
Oh.
And a very quick story about Ogden Nash. One day in early September, I think, we were all sitting on the beach because it was hurricane season, and there was about to be a hurricane, and they were about to tell everybody to get off the beach. And we were sitting with Ogden Nash, and Ogden Nash looked at us one day, and he said, "I think we better get off the beach, or tomorrow we're all going to be misspelled names in the Boston Herald."
That's a great anecdote. God knows I misspell names. So why don't we listen to some of your poetry?
Okay. What would you?
Whatever you want.
All right. Let me.
Shorelines, which can be purchased on the Ibbetson Street Press website, IBBETSONPRESS.com, Amazon, and I think there's some over at the Porter Square Books.
There's both some at Porter Square Books. Are there some at Gloria?
I hope so.
I don't know. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start with the first poem in the collection, just because it's sort of. I go up to Round Pond, Maine, which is on the Bristol Peninsula, where Damascotta is at the head of the Bristol Peninsula, but it's down on the Bristol Peninsula, and it's a little harbor that looks as if it is a fresh pond, but it's not. It's actually sort of 3/4 of a circle, and then it gives out onto a bay. So this is called Fog at Round Pond, Maine. See how the boats are compassed to the wind, bows pointed east toward Muscongas Bay, taut on their moorings, slipped against the play of tides, their line is of a single mind. They set their sterns to evergreen and rock that steeps and slides the shore into the sea. They dream of knowing hands, a liberty, a rowing out of shifts, untying knots, But as the fog, warm water, silver smoke rolls over them, investing row on row, their masts and hulls no longer purposed for, the harbor and the harbor all are cloaked in soft gray shapes like wood piles under snow, while dreams of sailing out remain ashore.
Okay. My guest, Philip Burnham. Oh, Civic. Has a new book out from Somerville's. Just go ahead.
Okay. Here's a poem from New York City, and it was an experience I had in the summer of 2001, about a month before 9/11. It's called Good Morning, Alice. I was sailing back from Europe on a ship, and we were just coming along the coast of Long Island in the early morning. An early look out from the starboard deck across a seascape dark as any deep, beneath a sky still keeping seeming night, northward a horizontal glimmering, along an unseen coast, 1,000 fallen stars, a motionless parade of paper lanterns, strung where the shore road edges to the bridge, outlined in fairy lights, a magic door to some enchanted world revolving into pylons and a cable, as a small escort, orange-tipped meringue clouds, floats overhead, through a sky blushing dusky rose, cooling to powder blue somewhere beyond Coney Island. Red channel buoys toll their morning bells as the ship, slicing water like a plow in the soft spring earth, slides barely under the Verrazano into the harbor, past your apartment in Brooklyn. Good morning, Alice. Dead ahead on Manhattan rise in different towers, mounting the morning watch on the battery. To either side, over the rivers of separation, wires stretch on the looms of the city, weaving disparity into New York. From an Eastern Ocean underworld, the sun freshly washed and slightly salty. Getting a light from the Green Lady's torch transforms opposing walls, aluminum, steel, stone, glass, into superficial dreams, a lost city of gold, ships shiny brass. We furrow up the Hudson on the tide, nudged and nosed by cocky pit bull tugs, into a midtown berth at 52nd Street, slim leaders tossed ashore, hawsers pulled from the muddy river, slipped heavily over their iron stanchions, lines winched taut. We are tied again to America. Let's see what would be a poem from Ibbetson Street.
By the way, now that you mentioned Ibbetson Street, are you in the next issue?
I'm not in the next issue.
All right,
no.
You've been in a lot of them, but
I've been in some, yes.
Ibbetson 32 won the Pushcart
Yes.
Prize for Michael
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
Poem, so. And Ibbetson 33 was going to be out, and we have a great lineup of poems that's going to be out. It's online now. You can get it. Just look up Ibbetson Street, and also it'll be out in print in about 10 days.
That's good. That's wonderful. I look forward to it, and it's a wonderful magazine. It's a wonderful magazine. This is called Shelves of War. I was in Ireland, in Cork City, for a week visiting my son who lived there. And it was raining every day, of course. It was also sunny every day, but during the rain we would often find things to do. One day we went and spent in the Cork City Library. This is called Shelves of War, the reading room of the Cork City Library. There is no war that is not made a book, fierce combat in the air, at sea, on plain or slope, played in vast theaters of maneuvers, rage-angry worlds pressed between hard covers, though pages printed letters, not enough to count fatalities, nor photographs reveal where deep, unfathomable hurt makes secret mutilation of the heart. Those jaunty cigarette-to-lips regards of someone courageous, sometime coward, conscripts, a uniform camouflage, doubts disguises before orders to move out. Here in Cork City Library's reading room, no one is gravely wounded, bleeding, no shouting, moaning, crying, cursing heard, where words of war are now the wars of words, standing shoulder to shoulder an array of titled spines, Bloody April, D-Day, Monte Cassino, Stalingrad, Berlin, Passchendaele, Gallipoli, the fallen quiet in perfect order still as on parade before some general. a shelved review, a brief roll call of ghosts bound in silence to gather civic dust. I've also spent some time in Paris.
You were in the diplomatic corps.
I was in the diplomatic corps, and I was assigned to Marseille for 3 years as a vice consul, and then I went into teaching after that. I went back to France relatively recently, and I found some subjects for poems that I thought were really interesting. One of them is a poem about a Roman aqueduct that stretches 1,000 feet over a river valley, and it's called the Pont du Gard, and it's been there for 2,000 years. The day lies brilliant under broken clouds as we approach midday the Pont du Gard. We have been traveling on Roman roads to join some million other passers-by, walking along the Gardon's mirror sky, passing into shadows of masonry. Later we'll eat beside the poplar trees, our terrace tables view enough to see the limestone arches' hollow symmetry. Lesser from greater, bridge to aquifer, ascending arcs whose weighted shoulders bore water from Uzès over the valley floor 2,000 years ago straight on to Nîmes, where lunch was olives, bread, and wine. Like ours, in France what changes stays the same. The stones ourselves, held by no mortar here but love, the water's conduit only air. Its broken ends, like lives, invite repair, or not. Better to leave things as they are, dressed antique stone, the heated atmosphere. Keep what is old for what is new, both dear. And maybe one
Keep
more
going.
poem? Couple more poems? Okay,
Keep going
all right.
for the sake of the
Okay,
tape.
all right. Here's a poem about my father, who was an English teacher. My father's black-winged pencils wrote a careful hand, corrections and suggestions written in the margins of my text. Verbs, subjects stand in agreement, wordy confessions thin to clarity. Commas become a pause, sometimes removed to carry actions, thought straight on. The subtle crafting of a clause to be subordinate, right word use not ignored. So often mindful of careless repetition, modifiers misplaced with civil paths to cross a wilderness in search of self-expression and grace. Within my manuscript, the markings of the unmistaken grammar of his love. And here's a poem that has a reference to Robert Frost's poem called Provide, Provide. And it's about a medieval Islamic scholar who wrote with reed pens and left the parings of his pens to be used as fuel to heat the water to wash his corpse. Called Ibn Khaldun's Bequest. Dear gentle readers and good friends, I leave the parings of my pens cut from the fertile river's reeds, swept, gathered, stored as fire seeds to heat the water when I fail, to wash my corpse from hair to nails. There's quantity enough for me to be washed warmly, carefully, that I may enter paradise, clean and perfumed or even spiced, where all the faithful host will be impressed with my prolixity. If you would write as much, don't ask another to perform the task of finding wood to heat the water, to bathe you for the ever after. With Ibn Khaldun as guide, or Robert Frost, provide, provide.
Thank you very much, Philip. From poet to poet, writer to writer.
Thank you.